Welcome to the new Barbarians podcast. I am Bill Mann with my co-host Mark Connors and producer Chris Rosa. Today is January 24th, 2025. This is the fifth installment of the new Barbarians. Today we are joined by a special guest and friend of mine. Please welcome Thársis Souza.
Thanks for having me, Bill.
Tharsis is a computer scientist, and he's a former senior VP of Product Management at Two Sigma Investments. He worked on the modeling engineering team there. He's a lecturer at Columbia University, a faculty member of the Masters of Science in Applied Analytics program, a volunteer in Gen AI initiatives at code.org, and a member at Correlation, one part of the Data Science for All initiative. He has 15 years of experience delivering new technology products in a variety of companies, from startups to Fortune 500s in the US, Brazil, and the UK. He's an author of scholarly publications and a regular speaker in academic and business conferences. He's also the author of the book Taming LLMs and the creator of Podcastify.ai. He holds a PhD in computer science from UCL, University of London, following a Master's of Philosophy and a Master's of Science in Computer Science and a Bachelor of Science in Computer Engineering. Mark is going to quickly recap recent events in the markets, and then we will introduce Tharsis and have a discussion about taming LLMs and creating robotic podcasts. Over to you, Mark.
Nice. That robotic podcasting was off the charts when you showed me that earlier this week. It just seemed like putting just these two whirling dervishes together, and they created things that you never thought possible out of just giving them a little bit of a prompt. So I'm looking forward to that. On the week, let's go back to last Friday. I was down with Fred Pai, former chairman of 3IQ, at the crypto ball, because why not? We figured we've been in the space working to get things done for a few years. So, we saw the crowd there, Novogratz, Michael Saylor, Cynthia Lummis, Senator, head of the Bitcoin bill that was announced on July 31st, next to Trump on the stage in Nashville. So it was a nice event. People were there, but we didn't know about the Trump coin being dropped. So let's just start there, because I think with all the initiatives that, the Bitcoin magazine and the Bitcoin initiative, and talking about Bitcoin strategic reserve, everything out of Donald Trump's mouth has been cryptocurrency. And we'll go into some executive orders. So it's a lot broader, and that has implications, I think, for industry. It doesn't dismiss how Bitcoin may be different, but the net that's being thrown is much wider than I think what was proposed or discussed on that stage in Nashville. So that was last Friday, and I think I start with that because it was a crypto ball, but everyone thought it was Bitcoin first, but there's a lot of other stuff going on. Could you, Chris, bring up that chart? I don't know if you were able to get it. I just sent it over a few minutes ago. We always like to start with a scorecard. We have a lot of ideas. Thársis is going to go over some very intricate and unique tools that he's been working on how to, be more productive with your investment process. But let's just look at what the broader markets are doing, top down. We look at year to date, which is, just 3 weeks. We look at the 5-year compounded rate and the 10-year compounded rate for Bitcoin, gold, the S&P, and the 7 to 10-year ETF. And, we picked up where we sort of dropped off on the 5-year rate. Bitcoin is leading the charge, up 13%, and gold is outpacing equities again. They did it last year, and they're doing it again. I think the last time that happened was 1979. And, I'm going back in context. I go back decades because, Bill and I decided to do this podcast, and, with the help of Chris, because there are two major forces that are slowly or not so slowly converging, and it's AI and digital assets. And it's being captured in the markets. So, we also look at bonds, which is single-digit midgets, either side of zero, almost on any 10, 5, 15-year, month-to-date, year-to-date level. So more the same, because what Trump's going to do with all the initiatives, it's still going to be inflationary. So that's all I wanted to touch on there. Now let's go a little bit below this, sort of street level. Let's go into the Bitcoin ETFs. They are a little over a year old, January 11th last year, Bill, and they are 119 billion, the fastest to 10 billion, 44 days by IBIT. The previous to 10 billion was like 200 days by JP Morgan broad market ETF. I mention this because it's still not priced in. The success of the ETFs continues. We've had over 2 billion this week alone, adding to that 117 billion, now 119. The pace of play is increasing, and where I'm going to finish with, and hopefully within that 5-minute window that we talked about before I get the buzzer, the executive orders that Trump talked about and the repeal by the SEC announced yesterday, enacted today, are not priced in, flat out. In 2022, the Biden SEC under Gensler enacted something that is, I think, the biggest block to banking. It was part of choke point 2.0 where people talk. It treated custodied assets, custodied digital assets, Bitcoin, et cetera, like what Coinbase does. And it said, you know what? You got to put it on balance sheet. It's not like in a safe deposit box. We really don't understand digital assets, so we're going to ask you to combine it. And that action then tells a holder that in a bankruptcy, they're basically a general unsecured creditor. So it was a disaster. Coinbase had to keep the business going, but people like Boney, State Street, JP Morgan, other banks wouldn't touch it. That repeal now allows stable coins and other assets to be custodied and traded. It's huge. No one understands it. The repeal is called SAB 122. I love it, just one digit higher versus the deleterious 121. So that was announced by the SEC yesterday, only enacted today. And on top of that, obviously, we have the digital assets President's Working Group, which I'll just do the TLDR on that one, which is basically after 180 days of the January 23rd strengthening American leadership in digital financial technology, that's the executive order, that a federal regulatory framework for digital assets and stablecoins is required to be submitted. They also want to create a digital asset stockpile, very different from what was said on the July 31st stage, which was a Bitcoin reserve. Now it's changed to a digital asset stockpile. They want to establish criteria for the inclusion and maybe include seized cryptocurrencies. Again, there are other seized cryptocurrencies, I believe, other than Bitcoin, but Bitcoin's the largest. So wide net, very firm language, greater clarity than Biden's digital asset executive order that was done in March of 22, which basically turned into a weaponization against digital assets. And in this executive order, Trump repealed many aspects of that executive order. So he's going all in, much broader, firm and fast, and it ain't priced in. So that was definitely longer than 5 minutes. So apologies for that, guys.
No problem, Mark. I got my start as an accountant, so anytime we're quoting SEC rules, it brings back good memories for me. So SAB 122 it is. Thank you.
That's it, man.
I've known Tharsis for 4 years, since he took a role at 2 Sigma, managing a specialized product engineering role within the modeling organization. Initially, Tharsis actually worked very closely with myself and our team of colleagues to upgrade some technology we were using for quantitative equity research. We recently had lunch, and he gave me a few tips that have saved me a massive amount of time conducting research with LLMs. Thank you very much for telling me about context windows, for turning me onto Claude, and then recently Notebook LM is a very cool tool. So thank you for joining us, Tharsis.
Thanks for having me, Bill.
And I want to definitely get to the Camino de Santiago at some point, but I was going to let Chris give you a few technical questions first, Chris being our resident engineer. So I think Mark and I will step back for a few minutes while you guys do your engineering talk.
Thanks, Bill. Appreciate it. Yeah, I really enjoyed reading. I've read Taming LLMs and also got familiar with your Podcastify, GitHub. Both were really fascinating, and then was also able to take a look at your PM view for how AIs are going to be kind of involved in the PM space going forward. So thank you for sharing all that with me. It was very interesting. I was curious, like, where do you see, given the non-deterministic nature of LLMs, where do you see it be involved in critical financial services? We know that we can't rely on LLMs to give the same output, right? So do you think it'll be involved in critical financial services going forward, and where do you see that involved?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for taking the time to really go through so much stuff. I wanna share two perspectives here. One is more kind of technical, and then the implications of some technical differences between really building products and, let's say, research workflows based on large language models. And then I want to circle back to some interesting things that Mark was highlighting pertaining to actually the new administration as well. And a couple things that I want to talk about that already are in effect as of today that might affect all of us in this area as well. Now, from a technical perspective, it's super interesting to think about really this kind of new world where software is being built on top of these wild machines called LLMs. They are very interesting because of two things. One thing is they are generative, right? And they are non-deterministic. They're generative because if before we were building tech products where the same input would give you the same output, now being generative, LLMs will give you answers that might differ even if you provide the same input. So now we are really evaluating distribution of results, right? So if, let's say, an analyst was doing some research before, they had a kind of a static kind of set of input that they were analyzing, and then they would provide a recommendation or they would provide an analysis. Now, with these generative machines, they're working kind of around distributions of information because LLM-based software and workflows, they have this creative nature, which is not a bug; it's a feature, right? Which brings a second aspect, which is really how to think about this, right? Now, our research workflows are ones where these LLMs are kind of a tool for idea generation, right? So now we have in our hands this very powerful kind of set of tools that are really very, very good at processing large amounts of data, but also generating ideas. And then what is the role of humans? The role of humans is really, of course, in addition to really co-authoring those ideas, is actually idea evaluation. So I think more and more human judgment, human taste will become more and more valuable. And then that's one of the key differentiator of new researchers, new analysts, new knowledge professionals in this Gen AI coming age is really how to really differentiate what is it that is valuable versus what is it that is not. So I think human judgment will become a key differentiator. Now, that's one aspect of the story, which is kind of really an implication coming from a kind of a technical observation of LLMs being generative and then also being non-deterministic. Now, I just want to have the opportunity to circle back on a couple of things that Mark mentioned. He was talking about some executive orders, right? And actually, even though it's been only 1 or 2 days, there are already implications in the LLM and Gen AI space. One of President Trump's first actions was to rescind Executive Order 14.110, which is safe, secure, and trustworthy development and use of AI, which was something published by the Biden administration in 2023, which among many things mandated government safety testing of open source models. What does it mean? It means that before, if you were developing a large language model that was open source, that was deemed quote unquote powerful, you had to report back to the government with safety results, right? What are the implications of this? I've seen VCs claiming that this is good news for open source because now open source community can move faster because they no longer need to report back to governments. They no longer need to really develop this kind of extensive safety frameworks. On the other hand, it can be dangerous, right? Now there are kind of really, at least from a government perspective, there are no safety guardrails. I'm curious about really how the administration will handle that, or actually whether the policy will be no regulations and the market around open source AI will self-regulate. But it's something that just happened that I'm very curious about really how it's going to unfold.
Thank you, Tharsis. I think I followed what you said now that I've been using LLMs and generative AI for a long time. But can you maybe just back up a little bit and explain for non-engineers and those that are new to this space what generative means and why that leads to non-determinism? And kind of feel free to explain that. Like for me, it's the old quality control step that we always did when humans did everything. And, for example, I use multiple LLMs to check the work of each other. And that's my extremely non-technical way of explaining it. But if you can just back up a little bit and explain just the basics.
Yeah, absolutely. Being generative and being non-deterministic are two, kind of orthogonal things, right? So being generative, it means that you can have, outputs that are not coming from your training set, right? When you think about traditional machine learning, which is kind of the usual way that we used to think about really these kind of AI predictive machines, we always had kind of a training set that we use to really train the model kind of on a supervised fashion. But the implication of that is that predictions were coming from these training sets. Let's say from a human perspective, that meant that humans were defining the data points, right, that the machines were trained on. And then those predictions are coming from those data points that humans defined in the design process. So always the output was something coming from, a data point that you use in the training phase, right? So for instance, if you were to train let's say a sentiment analysis model where, let's say the Federal Reserve, has some, announcement, you can build a training set where for each document or parts of the document, you can have kind of a human expert labeling whether it's hawkish, dovish, these kinds of things, right? And then humans were creating these things, and then the machine was there to kind of really minimize a loss function such that predictions were kind of fitting the distribution of those data points that were used for training the model. But the predictions themselves, they were coming from the data sets. They were not being created, right? They were coming from the data sets. So that's non-generative, let's call it that way, just for the sake of our argument. Now with LLMs, let's say the outputs are not coming from the training set. They are really probabilistic generations because LLMs are next token prediction machines. So when you look at the whole answer, those answers might not be true, might not be factual, because they are not coming from a training set, which then in turn can lead to hallucinations, which brings a key complexity and issue with LLMs, which is if before we had to say, garbage in, garbage out, now with LLMs, you can have garbage in, beautiful stuff out. So LLMs are very deceptive to the human eye, right? Because they are, powerful and generative. So they are trained to always give you a kind of natural sounding answer from the human perspective, right? So that's the generative part of it. And the non-deterministic part of it is really coming from the probabilistic nature, where they're predicting the next token, and the next token is not necessarily kind of only one possibility. It's coming from a distribution of possibilities. So every time that you ask a question, even if it is the same question, the answer of the next token will come from a distribution of possibilities, right? Which of course you can use in your advantage, thinking as kind of a creative, machine. But you need to keep that in mind when you are building your workflows to really understand whether the creative nature of those machines, they are playing your advantage or against your research and work.
Tharsis, Bill, mind if I jump in and ask Tharsis a question? I like what you said about the probabilistic curve, and when you ask a question, it doesn't rely only on strict data. It creates something based on its model to give you an output, and the same question most likely could give you a different answer because it's pulling from this probability distribution. Is that right?
That's right.
So, and being a former risk manager, we use different things. I never liked Monte Carlo really because it would you didn't really know where it came from. It was like, hey, listen, given this mess, you could lose this, but don't know. So people would use stress tests and then other tools. How do you know when you ask it 6 questions and you get 6 different answers that those 6 answers represent 50% of the call it distribution curve? I'm going back to mean variance just because I'm a simple person. Could you use it to do that, to say I'm comfortable that I get the best 6 answers because it'll only give me the highest probabilities first, or does it work differently?
No, that's a very good point. We are just up-leveling the discussion because we understand, a kind of a pitfall or feature that is idiosyncratic to LLMs. That's exactly why being aware of how LLMs are different than traditional software is key, because then we can really up-level the discussion and then really, okay, how can I take that in our advantage, right? So what you're describing could be called a sampling strategy, right? Let's say in LLM world, which is, hey, how can I really customize the sampling of the answers? So as opposed to using the default answer from those LLMs, which oftentimes if you use OpenAI or Claude, they might be, giving you an answer that is following the distribution of the answers. Can I have control over that sampling strategy? The answer is yes. At least if you use open source models, you can have full control of the sampling strategy. Meaning, you can implement yourself a greedy strategy, for instance, where I only want to pick up the most probable next token. You can do that, right? You can also estimate how confident the LLM is when providing an answer, right? And then one way to compute that is really to estimate how uniform the distribution of answers is, because of course, if the distribution is uniform, one could argue that's a level of uncertain. The LLM is uncertain, right? If the next token distribution is uniform, it means the LLM is not sure about what's next, right? But if the distribution is extremely skewed, okay, the LLM is more sure. So we think about it. We are kind of doing risk management on LLMs, right? We're estimating, uncertainty of LLM responses, right? By looking at, the distribution of answers and then developing a sampling strategy that makes sense for my own use case. That's exactly the kind of discussion that we should be having when using those LLMs going forward. You are on mute, Bill, I believe.
Thanks for that, Tharsis.
So Tharsis, to put it back into our parlance, like it sounds like we need to have confidence intervals or some other measure of reliability. And it seems like you can tune a open source LLM to, only give you output that you presumably trust based on some of these statistical measures. Is any of that available in these like user interface based LLMs? So, a lot of people use ChatGPT, they ask it a question, it gives them a bad answer eventually, and, it may be hallucinating. Is there any way for like a layman to understand the relative accuracy or risk that it's going to give them, a less confident response?
Yes, but I think there are two dimensions of your question. I think one dimension is, determinism, and another dimension is factuality, which are two different things. When it comes to deterministic nature, most products today, commercial or open source, they give you a parameter, which is the temperature of the model, right? And the temperature is a way to adjust the probability distribution of the next token prediction. And the higher the temperature, the more, let's say creative the model is. And the lower the temperature, more deterministic the responses are. But they're not guaranteed to be, deterministic. So that's something that I would say every product today should offer to any user, regardless of being kind of proprietary open source or kind of interface product or API product. You might find somewhere a temperature there, which will be adjusting that. But again, it does not guarantee that it's deterministic. Like for instance, if you were to build kind of a programmatic or systematic workflow where you wanted to build a machine that does sentiment analysis, right? So positive, like hawkish or dovish, or positive, negative. You cannot guarantee that the machine will answer only these two options for you, by just adjusting the temperature and by just doing prompt engineering. You cannot guarantee that. You need to do something different by really using other tools to really do what Mark was talking about, which is kind of really, can I have full control of the sampling strategy, right? So I would say really having full control of the responses, you can't today via the usual UIs that you have out there. You need to really kind of use some other more APIs to have full control of that. And chapter 2 of the book is about that. So if you were building a workflow, a programmatic workflow, and you wanted to really control the output, so the output only answers a finite of possible answers, how would you do that, right? So chapter 2 is exactly about that. But that is solving only dimension number 1 that I mentioned, which is determinism. The second dimension of your answer is factuality. How do I know, okay, now I know how to control deterministic nature. how do I know whether it's true or false? How do I guarantee that the answer is actually not a hallucination, right? That's a completely separate question, which today, let's say a retail user, they have a couple of options at their disposal. Let's say ChatGPT does not offer you that. Claude does not offer you that. Meaning, if you ask questions to them, you might get answers which are non-factual. Like for instance, in my book, I asked, that's chapter number 3. I asked, who is the author of the book Taming LLMs to ChatGPT, and the answer looked seemingly correct. Like if I were not the author, right? Like for a general human being, because it was kind of, oh, the author of Taming LLMs is, and then the ChatGPT said like 3 full names and the year and everything. Oh, that really looked like correct. But of course, the answer was completely wrong. The author of the book is myself. So the machine really answered a seemingly correct answer, but that was false, right? And there are few tools out there that are targeting that market. Let's call it the markets of factuality. How to leverage LLMs in a space where the answers are factual. And one example is Gemini, where there is one of the options there where you can do grounded search, and there they will give you an answer with citation, right? So I'm not sure one could claim the answer is factual, but at least you have references, so the human can double check, right? So Gemini is one example of a product that is tackling this issue of factuality. Enterprises, they are leveraging something called RAGs, which is retrieval-augmented generation, which is, hey, instead of really letting the LLM use their training set, can I use my own training set, my own PDFs, my own databases, my Jira tickets, my internal websites, intranet, as kind of the input, right? So you can build these RAG systems, which is kind of really a retrieval system that is augmenting the LLM with domain-specific data that is recent, that is coming from the user, and then the LLM can maximize the chance. You can maximize the chances of really the LLM providing you with factual information. That's how I solved who's the author of Taming LLMs problem in chapter 3. I provided the website of the book as to a RAG system, so the LLM would know who's the author, as opposed to trying to invent an answer.
Thank you. And we are lucky that your book is addressing the answers to some of these questions. We will definitely include the links to your book and your other publications in the show notes. And Chris, I think you had another question to follow up.
Yeah, I just had one clarification. So you're saying ChatGPT currently in its UI does not allow you to change the temperature. So, and I would imagine it probably leans more towards a higher temperature in its responses, so that it seems more creative. Is that correct?
Actually, I don't know whether they offer the temperature parameter in their UI. They change the UI every day, right? So I might be wrong if I provide an answer. But I think one way to answer the question is I think these products they might offer you in their settings. However, it's not guaranteed to be deterministic, right? So meaning don't trust the answer. Never trust the answer when you're using these kind of retail products, except for a couple of examples like Gemini, which they seem to be very focused on providing grounded search for users. But again, you should not trust either. But at least they provide citations back so humans can verify.
Yeah, Perplexity's done a great job in search in that regard as well, giving you kind of grounded, cited answers. I've been enjoying using that a lot as well. So I guess last kind of philosophical question, and I know we have to move on, so I don't want to dive too deep onto this, but a lot of people argue sentience, that these models are sentient, but it seems, listening to you for the last 10 minutes, you're kind of making the exact opposite argument, in that humans are being tricked by its nature. Would you agree with that?
100%. Think about it. What's the difference between ChatGPT 3.0 and ChatGPT 3.5? Right? Of course, ChatGPT 3.5 led to the quote-unquote ChatGPT moment, right? And became, the software product to gain 100 million users the fastest in the history of humankind. However, if you compare 3.5 with 3.0, they have the same size, the model, right? Like really the foundational model, they have the same sizes. So what's the difference between the two then? Why is it that nobody was talking about 3.0 and then everybody was so, eager to use 3.5? Well, my answer is alignment. Alignment to human preferences, which is kind of technical terms that mean they worked on post-training in order to make the model respond in a human preferred way, in a way where humans would look like it. Wait a second, is this coming from a machine or is it coming from a human? So you cannot really differentiate the two. So they really seemed like really a human generated thing, which is what I call the anthropomorphization, if that is a word, of AI. Now AI is you cannot distinguish AI output from human output, right? So they're still machines, but they are being trained to look more.
Tharsis, there's no way I'm gonna let you go away without saying that word again. What was that? I'm gonna throw that in a LLM.
Anthropomorphization.
Yes.
So I also wanted to jump in here really quickly. So you said the answers look like they're humans, and that reminds me of one thing. A robot that looks like Arnold Schwarzenegger that's sent back in time to kill John Connor. What do you think about that? Like, have you seen Terminator, or is that?
I have, of course. But circling back to Chris' point and linked to your very culturally, significant observation, Bill. Machines can become sentient when they start to look more and more sentient when they start to have access to the world, right? So before LLMs, or at least until these days, humans are still controlling them. However, in 2025, there will be like billions of dollars to, transform LLMs into agents. So that's the agentic transformation, right? Now, agents.
Hold on. That's another movie. They were agents in the Matrix.
Exactly. And then what's the difference between an agent and an LLM? They can change the world around them. And that change can involve violence, like the two movies that you've mentioned, Bill, or it can mean good things, right? In technical terms, the LLMs have access to tools via function calling. So now LLMs in the agentic era, they have access to functions, so they can call APIs by themselves. They might decide to call APIs. And once LLMs can call APIs, they can change the world around us. They can buy flight tickets for us. They might decide to send data somewhere or bring data here, do some processing. So they can really make decisions by themselves and then change the world, including our world. And that's how they can become more and more seemingly sentient, right? And then that could be a good thing, but could also be a dangerous thing as well.
I think we know how I feel about that, I'm not looking forward to the robot takeover.
That reality is
That's
scary too, with Trump just revoking that the regulations coming from the government. We really need to get a handle on that.
well, that's why we need a book. Someone should write a book that talks about taming them. I think that is what we need. If anyone has an idea.
But change will happen when we actually take action, right? So the book is about really trying to educate builders in this area, because there is a little bit of alienation when tech industry builds for tech, using tech terms and conditions and use tech policies. So it's important that we have experts from other fields. So we are actually solving, problems that are relevant and really aligned with human values, as opposed to kind of a tech centric world. So bringing awareness is one step, but I think taking action in collaboration with domain experts across several domains is how we're going to really transform this in a positive way.
Cool. Well, I think we're going to wrap up soon. And like I said at the start, we definitely have to talk about the Camino de Santiago. But before that, I did want to ask you, Tharsis, if you've ever really thought about the role of a product manager in the age of Gen AI.
Oh, yes. The answer is yes. Of course, I do work within, product management. And as I am, as I manage product managers, as I work with, within tech teams, I feel the responsibility to developing my own, view in terms of really how, tech teams and their roles will evolve, in the Gen AI age. And I think it's gonna be shocking in my opinion. I think roles will be more overlapping, which might create confusion for individual contributors, which might be thinking, what is it that is really the value that I can bring in? But also, increase pressure for leaders as well, because they need to make decisions as far as really what is the profile of new hires, how to structure teams to solve business problems. In a world where with Gen AI, seemingly anybody can do anything, right? How should we think about really what is the value that we should put in a job description when hiring somebody or structuring a team, right? And this is all driven by three trends that I see, which I will mention real quick. But I think it's really foundational to the change that I see in the workplace, but in particular in technology. The first one is the price of intelligence going to zero. If you look at really the cost for all these kind of the products and services coming from these foundational models, it's dropping 10x every year, right? So there will be a moment, and that moment is this year, next year, where this has become commoditized, right? So how should we think about really our role and our products and services competitive advantage when the price of intelligence is going to zero? Before, when we were building products and services, in most cases, right, we had a kind of a value proposition around a certain capability, right? Oh, I am capable of doing X, therefore I'm going to charge you this amount of dollar, right? Now we need to this strategy is being challenged, right? Because, hey, wait a second, why should I pay you for that when I have this Gen AI tool which costs $20 a month that can do something similar, right? So the price of intelligence going to zero is a big trend that we gotta keep in mind, understand the impacts into our work. The second one is something that we talked about, which is the anthropomorphic nature of Gen AI-based products. Before, when we talked about AI, we've been talking about AI transforming the world for 100 years, 50 years, right? But it was kind of something that it was hard to really understand how it changed our daily life. So if we talk to, if I talk to my parents, it was a little bit hard to really have a conversation around the impact of AI. Now it's easy. It's because, AI look like humans, right? AI products, right? So that's the anthropomorphic nature of AI products. It's easier to really, from a user experience perspective, to actually benefit from those machines because, again, they're being fine-tuned to behave like humans, right? So that's a second trend that I see. And then the third trend is really human agency, which is kind of a consequence of number one. Now everybody's empowered to kind of build their own solutions. So if before I would pay for products and services, now, hey, I can build that. So the user has the ability to solve their own problem, right? So there is this trend of human agency. So when we put these three trends together, that is changing the role of knowledge workers, but in particular product managers, because product managers are the ones, that are supposedly really trying to define competitive advantage being questioned. Product managers are the ones really trying to define, what problems we should solve, which now I would argue has become the most relevant aspect of the story, because before, how you built was kind of a key thing. Now anybody can build. So I think product managers now might have, a defensible dimension as far as role, because it's more and more valuable to actually prioritize, define the problem to be solved, define the industry sector segments to really penetrate, right? Think about really what problems will exist if AI increases in ability in 10x, right? As opposed to really what problems we should solve now. So product managers are the ones that will be well positioned, in my opinion, to really ideate over that and prioritize what problems we should be solving. So I think the implications are really multifold. I want to emphasize the key three trends, because I think those three key trends will continue and they will have ramifications in, how, economies will shift in the near future.
Thank you, Tharsis. I believe your answer is consistent with the paper you recently published on the topic. And I just like the last takeaway that you have there, which is AI won't replace humans, but humans augmented by AI will replace humans who ignore AI's evolution. And all product managers will be AI product managers, because these tools are it's not something you can ignore. And then I'll just cut to the chase a little bit. I think your Podcastify tool was what led to your open source book, Taming LLMs. And, Notebook LM is cool because it allows you to create a podcast after you upload a bunch of documents. And I would love to actually talk more in depth about that. But as we're running out of time, I did want to make sure that we cover what you were doing in your time off. So can you just tell us what the Camino de Santiago is and how far you walked, assuming that that's what it is?
That's right. So first of all, the Camino de Santiago de Compostela is something that has been around since the 5th century. In fact, the word pilgrim comes from the Camino de Santiago de Compostela, and it started as a religious, journey where people were walking towards Santiago, where the remains of the Santiago or Jacob, depends on the country, but in Spanish it's Santiago, apostle, or the remains were found. So it was really kind of a religious type of thing, but now it has become a religious, spiritual kind of adventure. So it's less about tourism, and it's more about really kind of a spiritual or religious mission, right? In my case, it was a unique opportunity that I had to bond with my father. So we walked together. He's 62 years old, but he's stronger than me. So we walked together, and also a way to kind of really, clean my mind as well as I was entering a new cycle in my life. Of course, it was in the middle of my 1-year garden leave. So it was a good way for me to really kind of reset my mindset while also testing myself physically and mentally. We do walk between 7 to 10 hours a day for more than 30 days. So you have a lot of time to think as well and reevaluate your priorities in your life. I highly recommend anyone to, whenever you have the opportunity to walk the Camino. I did the most traditional Camino, which is the one that starts in France, in Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port, and then goes, of course, until Santiago. But the Camino, there are multiple Caminos, right? There is one path starting from Portugal, another one from Spain. There are Caminos starting from Turkey, China, everywhere. So if you are walking towards Santiago de Compostela and you get there, it's a Camino, right? It just happens that the French one is the most traditional one. And that's the one that I did, and I think it's unique. You get to also know a lot of people coming from around the globe, all of them with a different reason to walk the Camino, and it's really interesting to get to know their stories as well, why they're doing the Camino, and even though we are all strangers to one another, we kind of very quickly become friends, and we become quite open to one another because we are kind of in the same path of life, right? And physically walking the Camino, but also all of us kind of in a phase of life where we are kind of revisiting who we are and then our goals and priorities as well. So we are also similar in terms of mindset as well. So highly recommend it.
That's awesome. I just looked at the map. So you did walk across the country of Spain, from France to the coast of Spain. How far was that?
It's about 600 miles.
Okay, so 600 miles, 30 days?
It's about that, yes. Of course, you get lost. You kind of sometimes you don't go through the most optimized path. So there is the official number, but the official number comes from the shortest path. But of course, you never take the shortest path in practice. So in my case, my answer would be around 600 miles.
That's amazing. And congrats to you and especially your father for completing that, 20 miles a day through all those little villages. And it's very impressive and sounds awesome.
And how fitting when you're doing that little life journey. It ain't a straight line, and sometimes you don't end up where you think you're going to go, whether it's in life or an LLM model or on your 600-mile journey.
Great. Well, thank you very much for coming and visiting us on our podcast today, Tharsis. I think that wraps it up. And I hope everyone has a great week. This will drop on January 27th. So happy Monday, everyone.
Thanks for having me. It was very fun.
Cheers.
Thank you.
Thanks, Thársis. See you guys.
Cheers.